The blizzard that buried Georgetown, Colorado in January of 1884 was not the first hardship Rebecca Ashford had faced, but it might be the one that finally killed her. Rebecca pressed her bare hands against the frozen windowpane of the one-room cabin, watching snow pile higher against the wood she had stacked just 2 days prior. The stack that was supposed to last through February. The stack that was already half gone. She was 22 years old, a widow of 8 months, and the gnawing emptiness in her stomach told her she had perhaps 3 days before hunger made her too weak to think straight. The winter had come early and vicious this year, catching everyone off guard, but it had been particularly cruel to a woman alone on the outskirts of town with no family and dwindling supplies. Her late husband Thomas had promised her a good life when they married 2 years ago. He had been kind enough, hardworking, with dreams of expanding their small mining claim into something prosperous. Then the mine collapse last May had taken him and 4 other men, leaving Rebecca with a cabin, a depleted pantry, and a future as uncertain as the swirling white chaos outside her window. She pulled her thin shawl tighter around her shoulders. The fabric was worn, patched in places where moths had gotten to it. Everything she owned was worn. Her 2 dresses, her single pair of boots with the sole coming loose, the blankets on her bed that barely kept the cold at bay even when she piled them all on at once. She had sold everything of value in the months following Thomas's death, just to buy food and firewood. The small amount of money from his life insurance had gone to paying debts she had not even known existed. Rebecca moved away from the window and checked the pot hanging over her meager fire. Watery soup made from the last of her potatoes and a handful of dried beans stared back at her. This would be her meal for today. Perhaps tomorrow too if she was careful. After that, she would have nothing but a small sack of flour and some salt. The wind howled, rattling the shutters. She had stuffed rags in every crack she could find, but the cold still seeped through, turning her breath to mist. Rebecca ladled some soup into her single tin bowl and sat on the edge of her bed, forcing herself to eat slowly to make it last, even though everything in her body screamed to devour it all at once. She thought about her options, as she had every day for the past week. Georgetown was a mining town, rough and practical, with more men than women and more saloons than churches. There were families here, decent people, but everyone struggled through winter. She could ask for help, but pride and shame had kept her from doing so for too long. Now, with the blizzard raging, going into town was impossible anyway. The snow was already past her knees when she had last checked, and the wind would freeze exposed skin in minutes. She could wait it out, hope the storm passed soon, and then make her way to town. But what if it did not pass? What if this was just the beginning of a brutal stretch of weather? She had heard stories of people starving in their homes, found weeks later when the thaw came. The thought made her stomach clench, though whether from fear or hunger she could not tell. Rebecca finished her soup and set the bowl aside. She added another precious log to the fire, knowing she was burning through her supply too quickly but unable to bear the cold. Then she wrapped herself in all her blankets and lay down on the bed, trying to conserve energy, trying not to think about the desperate situation she was in. Sleep came fitfully, full of dreams about warmth and food and Thomas's face, young and smiling, before the mountain had taken him. She woke to the sound of something heavy hitting the side of the cabin. Rebecca sat up, heart pounding, blankets falling away. The fire had burned down to embers and the cold bit at her immediately. Another thud, then another. Not the wind, something else. Fear spiked through her. Bears sometimes came down from the mountains in winter, searching for food. Wolves traveled in packs. Or it could be something worse, someone desperate like herself, willing to take what little she had. Rebecca grabbed the iron poker from beside the fireplace, the only weapon she had, and moved toward the door. The thuds continued, irregular but persistent. Then a new sound, muffled by the wind but distinctly human. A voice. A man's voice calling out. She hesitated, poker raised, then heard it again. Not threatening. Struggling. Rebecca set the poker down and pulled the door open, fighting against the wind. Snow blasted into the cabin and she squinted against the white chaos. At first she saw nothing, then movement near the woodpile. A dark shape, man-sized, half buried in snow. Without thinking, she plunged out into the storm. The cold was shocking, stealing her breath. She wore only her thin dress and shawl, but she pushed through the knee-deep snow toward the figure. As she got closer, she could make out details. A man collapsed against her woodpile, his horse standing nearby, head down against the wind. "Help," he managed, his voice rough. "Please." Rebecca grabbed his arm and pulled. He was heavy, solid muscle under his snow-covered coat, but he managed to get his feet under him with her help. Together they staggered toward the cabin door. His horse followed, and Rebecca made a split-second decision, guiding them all inside. The cabin was small, barely meant for one person, but she could not leave the animal to freeze. Once inside, she shoved the door closed against the wind and turned to assess what she had just brought into her home. The man was tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair plastered to his head with melting snow. His face was weathered, with a strong jaw and a nose that looked like it had been broken at least once. He was maybe a few years older than her, perhaps 26 or 27. His clothes were good quality, a heavy wool coat and leather gloves, the kind of gear someone who knew the mountains would wear. He was also shivering violently, his lips tinged blue. "Get those wet clothes off," Rebecca said, moving into action. "You will freeze if you stay in them." He nodded, fingers fumbling with his coat buttons. She turned her attention to the horse, a large bay gelding who was also covered in snow. She had no idea what to feed it, had nothing to offer, but she found an old blanket and rubbed the animal down as best she could, clearing the snow and ice from its coat. Behind her, she heard the wet thud of clothing hitting the floor. She kept her back turned, focusing on the horse until the man spoke. "Thank you." His voice was steadier now, though still shaking. "I thought I was done for." Rebecca turned, keeping her eyes carefully on his face. He had stripped down to his undershirt and trousers, both damp but not soaked through. His coat, vest, and outer shirt lay in a heap on the floor. He was standing near the fireplace, as close to the dying embers as he could get. "Sit down before you fall down," she said, pointing to the bed. It was the only place to sit besides the floor. She grabbed her blankets and thrust them at him, then busied herself building up the fire. She used 2 more logs, a luxury she could not afford, but the man would die without warmth, and she supposed she would too, now that all the cold air had gotten in. Once the fire was crackling again, she turned to face him properly. He had wrapped the blankets around himself and was watching her with startling blue eyes. They were the color of the sky on a clear winter day, bright and intense in his tanned face. "I am Prescott Malone," he said. "Most people call me Prees." "Rebecca Ashford," she replied, pulling her shawl tighter. Now that the immediate crisis was over, she was acutely aware of how inappropriate this situation was. A strange man in her cabin, sitting on her bed. If anyone in town found out, her already tenuous reputation would be destroyed. "I apologize for the intrusion, Mrs. Ashford," Prees said, as if reading her thoughts. "I was trying to make it through to Georgetown before the storm hit, but I misjudged badly. I saw your smoke and followed it." "It is Miss, actually," Rebecca corrected quietly. I was married, but my husband passed last year. Something shifted in his expression, a softening around his eyes. I am sorry for your loss. She nodded, not trusting herself to speak. She had heard those words so many times in the past months that they had lost meaning, but something in the way he said them felt genuine. How long were you out in the storm? She asked instead. Too long. Several hours at least. I lost the trail and my sense of direction. If not for your fire, I would have ridden right past civilization. He paused, glancing around the small cabin, and she saw the moment he registered the bare shelves, the meager supplies, the general air of poverty. His jaw tightened. Though I fear I have brought my problem to your doorstep. We are both in the same predicament now, Rebecca said with more calm than she felt. She moved to the pot of soup, saw there was perhaps one more bowl's worth left. She had been planning to make it last 2 more days. Are you hungry? Starving, but I cannot take your food. You do not have a choice. You need to get your strength back, and I need you well enough to help dig us out when this storm passes. She ladled the soup into her bowl and handed it to him. Eat. Pries hesitated, then accepted the bowl. What about you? I already ate, she lied. Her stomach cramped in protest, but she ignored it. He studied her for a long moment, those blue eyes seeing too much. Then he deliberately drank only half the soup before handing the bowl back. I insist you share. I will not be responsible for you starving on my account. Rebecca wanted to argue, but the smell of the soup made her head swim with hunger. She took the bowl and finished it, trying not to gulp it down like a starving animal. When she was done, she set the bowl aside and met his gaze. That was the last of my food, apart from some flour and salt. Pries's expression went grim. I have supplies in my saddlebags. Dried beef, hardtack, coffee. Not much. I was planning to stock up in Georgetown, but it will keep us alive for a few days. Relief flooded through her so intensely she had to sit down on the floor before her knees gave out. Thank you. Do not thank me yet. We are still in a bad situation. He looked toward the window where snow was visible through the cracks in the shutters. This storm could last days. You have enough firewood? No, Rebecca admitted. Maybe 3 more days if we are very careful. Pries was quiet for a moment, thinking. The woodpile outside, is there more under the snow? A bit. Maybe another day's worth. Then we dig it out as soon as the wind dies down enough, and we ration everything carefully, the fire, the food, everything. He looked at her seriously. If we are smart and lucky, we will make it through this. Rebecca nodded, trying to feel encouraged by his confidence. But she knew the reality. 2 people, a horse, limited supplies, and a blizzard that showed no signs of stopping. The margins were razor thin. As if sensing her thoughts, Pries spoke again, his voice quieter. I have been in worse situations and survived. We will figure this out. What kind of situations? She asked, curious despite herself. I spent 2 years as an Army scout out of Fort Laramie, tracking through the worst terrain in all kinds of weather. I have been snowed in, caught in prairie fires, chased by hostile parties, and once nearly died of thirst in the Badlands. I learned how to survive. Why did you leave the Army? My contract ended, and I decided I had had enough of taking orders. I have been working as a guide and occasional ranch hand since then, moving around, seeing the country. He shifted the blankets, and she tried not to notice how broad his shoulders were. I was heading to Georgetown because I heard there might be work at one of the mines. The mines are dangerous, Rebecca said quietly. My husband died in a collapse. I am sorry, Pries said again, and again it sounded genuine. How long were you married? 2 years. We had known each other for only 3 months before we wed. She smiled sadly. Everyone said we were rushing, but Thomas was so certain, so confident about our future, I believed him. He should not have left you unprepared like this. Rebecca bristled. He did not plan to die. No, but a man should make sure his wife is taken care of just in case. Savings, connections, something. Pree's voice was matter of fact, not cruel, just stating reality. Did he have family in Missouri? They wanted me to come live with them after he died, but I would have been a burden, another mouth to feed. I thought I could manage on my own. She laughed bitterly. I was wrong. You have managed for 8 months. That is more than some could do. Barely. I sold everything of value, took in some sewing work when I could, but it was not enough. And then this winter came early, and the cold made it too hard to walk into town regularly, and my supplies ran low, and I just kept thinking surely it would get better. Surely spring would come early. Surely something would change. She stopped, realizing she was rambling, revealing too much to this stranger, but Prees just nodded. Pride is a dangerous thing in situations like this. It keeps people from asking for help until it is too late. Are you speaking from experience? Yes. He did not elaborate, and she did not push. Outside, the wind continued to howl. Inside, the fire crackled and the horse shifted its weight, remarkably calm for being in such close quarters. Rebecca supposed the animal was just grateful to be out of the storm. We should get some rest, Prees said. I will take the floor, you keep the bed. You will freeze on the floor. I have slept in worse places. That may be, but you were half frozen when you arrived. You need proper rest to recover. Rebecca stood up, making a decision. The bed is big enough for 2 if we stay on our own sides. We keep the blankets between us for propriety. We pool our body heat to conserve the fire. Prees looked like he wanted to argue, but practicality won out. Are you sure? I am sure that I want both of us to survive this, and the best way to do that is to be sensible about our resources. Heat is a resource. She tried to sound more confident than she felt. Besides, it is not as though we have a choice. This is survival, not a social occasion. All right, Prees agreed. But I will keep my back to you, and you have my word as a gentleman that I will not take advantage of the situation. I believe you, Rebecca said, and surprised herself by meaning it. There was something solid and trustworthy about this man, even though she had known him for less than an hour. They arranged themselves on the small bed, Prees closest to the wall, Rebecca on the outer edge, blankets layered between and over them. It was awkward and strange, but also immediately warmer. Rebecca could feel the heat radiating from his body, even through the layers, and for the first time in hours her shivering began to ease. Thank you, Prees said quietly into the darkness, for pulling me out of the storm, for sharing what little you have. You could have left me out there. I would not leave anyone to freeze, Rebecca replied. Besides, you brought supplies. It is a fair trade. Still, you took a risk bringing a stranger into your home. I appreciate it. Rebecca did not answer, just closed her eyes and tried to sleep. But her mind was racing, thinking about their situation, about the strange turn her desperate circumstances had taken, about the man lying rigid and respectful at her back. She had been alone for so long, and now suddenly she was not. It should have been terrifying, but instead she felt something she had not experienced in months. Hope. The storm raged for 3 full days. During that time, Rebecca and Prees fell into a careful routine. They woke at dawn, built up the fire, and ate a small breakfast of hardtack softened in coffee. Then they spent the daylight hours doing what needed to be done, tending the horse, maintaining the fire, rationing supplies, and talking. They talked about everything. Prees told her about growing up on a small ranch in Wyoming, about losing his parents to fever when he was 16, about joining the army because he had nothing else and nowhere to go. He told her about the vast plains and the mountains he had crossed, about the people he had met, both friendly and hostile, about learning to track and survive in the wilderness. Rebecca told him about her childhood in Pennsylvania, about her parents dying when she was 19, about meeting Thomas at a church social and agreeing to move west with him as his wife. She told him about the hopes she had had for their life together, about the loneliness of being one of the few married women her age in Georgetown, about the crushing weight of grief after Thomas died. They talked about smaller things, too. Favorite foods, books they had read, songs they remembered from childhood. Pries had a dry sense of humor that surprised her, and she found herself laughing more in those 3 days than she had in the past 8 months combined. On the second day, during a brief lull in the wind, they managed to dig out the rest of the woodpile. Pries did most of the heavy work, insisting that Rebecca stay inside where it was warmer, but she refused. They worked side by side, clearing snow, hauling wood, making sure they had enough to last. When they came back inside, both were soaked and shivering, and they had to strip down and wrap in blankets by the fire to warm up. Rebecca tried not to look at Pries's broad chest and muscled arms, tried not to notice the scars that marked his skin, each one telling a story of survival. But she noticed anyway, and something warm and unfamiliar stirred in her belly. On the third day, the wind finally stopped. The snow continued to fall, but gently now, just a whisper compared to the roaring blizzard. They stood at the window together, looking out at a world transformed into something alien and beautiful, everything buried under drifts of white. "We should be able to make it to town tomorrow," Pries said, "if the weather holds." "Yes," Rebecca agreed, and was surprised by the twinge of disappointment she felt. These past few days had been strange and difficult, but also oddly peaceful. Once they reached Georgetown, everything would change. Pries would go his way, she would go hers, and this brief interlude of companionship would be over. "Rebecca," Pries said, and the use of her first name made her look up at him. "What will you do after we get to town?" "I do not know," she admitted. "I cannot stay in the cabin, not alone. I have no money, no family, no prospects. I suppose I will have to throw myself on the charity of the church and hope they can find me some kind of work." Pries was quiet for a long moment, his blue eyes searching her face. "Would you consider another option?" "What option?" "Come with me. Not to Georgetown, but farther south. I have a friend who runs a ranch down near Denver. He is always looking for help, and he is a good man, fair and honest. You could work in the house, cooking and cleaning. It would be respectable, and you would have a roof over your head and regular meals." Rebecca's heart began to pound. "Why would you help me like that? You barely know me." "I know enough. I know you are brave and resourceful. I know you saved my life, and I know you deserve better than slowly starving to death in a cabin alone." His voice was intense, earnest. "And I know that I do not want to walk away and wonder for the rest of my life if you made it through the winter. Pries, I cannot ask you to do that. You are not asking. I am offering." He reached out and took her hand, his grip warm and strong. "Please, Rebecca, let me help you." She looked down at their joined hands, feeling the calluses on his palm, the strength in his fingers. No one had touched her with such care since Thomas died. No one had looked at her the way Pries was looking at her now, like she mattered, like she was worth saving. "All right," she whispered. "I will come with you." The smile that broke across his face was like the sun coming out after a storm. "Good. That is good." They left at dawn the next day. Pries fashioned a makeshift seat for Rebecca behind his saddle, and they packed what little she owned in his saddlebags. The cabin she left behind without regret. It had been a place of sorrow and struggle, and she was glad to be free of it. The ride to Georgetown took 3 hours through snow-clogged trails. The town was a cluster of buildings clinging to the mountain, half buried in drifts. Smoke rose from chimneys, and Rebecca could hear the distant sound of saws and hammers as people dug themselves out. They stopped at the general store to buy supplies for the journey south. Pries paid for everything, waving off Rebecca's protests. Then they stopped at the boarding house, where Pries arranged for a hot meal and a room for the night. 2 rooms, Rebecca insisted, mindful of her reputation. 2 rooms, Pries agreed with a grin. But that night, after they had eaten their fill of stew and bread and pie, after Rebecca had soaked in a real bath for the first time in months, after she had put on her cleanest dress and brushed out her hair, there was a knock on her door. She opened it to find Pries standing there, freshly shaved, his hair still damp from his own bath. He looked younger without the scruff on his jaw, more handsome than she had realized. "I am sorry to bother you," he said, "but I realized I never asked you something important." "What is that?" "If you are willing to travel with me, to trust me enough to go to Denver, does that mean you might be willing to consider something more?" He took a deep breath, and she saw nervousness in his eyes for the first time. "I am not a rich man, Rebecca, and I do not have much to offer. But I have steady work, and I know how to take care of someone. And these past few days with you have been the best I have had in years. I know it is fast. I know we have not known each other long, but I felt I should speak plainly before we get to Denver." Rebecca's heart was thundering in her chest. "What are you asking me, Pries?" "I am asking if you would consider marrying me. Not right away, not until you are ready, but eventually. If you find, after more time together, that you could care for me the way I am beginning to care for you." He looked almost afraid, this man who had faced down danger and hardship without flinching. "I know I am not much, and I know you have already lost one husband, but I promise I would do everything in my power to keep you safe and happy." Rebecca stared at him, overwhelmed. It was too fast, too sudden. She had known him for only 4 days, but she thought about those 4 days, about how he had treated her with respect and kindness, about how he had made her laugh, about how safe she felt in his presence. She thought about the alternative, about being alone and dependent on charity, about the long, slow struggle to survive. And she thought about the way her heart lifted when he smiled at her, the way his hand had felt holding hers, the way she had slept peacefully with him at her back, no longer afraid. "I do not know if I can love again," she said honestly. "Thomas's death hurt so much, and I am afraid of going through that again. I understand, and I am not asking you to love me right now. I am just asking if you are willing to try to see where this goes. No pressure, no expectations. Just 2 people who get along well and might have a future together if we are both willing to take the chance." Rebecca took a shaky breath, then nodded. "All right, I am willing to try." The relief and joy on his face made her smile despite her nervousness. He reached out and gently cupped her cheek, his thumb brushing her skin. "Thank you. I promise you will not regret this." "I hope not," she said softly. They stood there for a moment, close but not quite touching, the air between them charged with possibility. Then Pries stepped back, putting proper distance between them. "Good night, Rebecca. Sleep well." "Good night, Pries." She closed the door and leaned against it, her heart still racing. She had just agreed to marry a man she barely knew. It was reckless and probably foolish. But for the first time since Thomas died, she felt alive, felt like her future held something other than mere survival. Maybe that was worth the risk. They set out for Denver the next morning. The journey took 5 days, traveling slowly through snow-covered terrain. Each night they stopped at small towns or way stations, always taking separate rooms, always maintaining the appearance of propriety. But each day they talked more, learned more about each other, and Rebecca felt the wall around her heart beginning to crack. Pries was patient and kind, never pushing, never demanding more than she was willing to give. He told her stories to pass the time, pointed out landmarks, taught her about tracking and reading the land. He listened when she talked about Thomas, about her grief and guilt and fear, and he never seemed jealous or impatient with her memories. "He was your husband, and you loved him," Pries said one evening as they sat by a fire at a small inn. "I would never ask you to forget him or pretend he did not matter. He was part of making you who you are, and I am grateful for that, even if I never met him." Rebecca felt tears prick her eyes. "Thank you for understanding. Of course." He reached across the space between them and took her hand, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. "I just hope that someday there will be room in your heart for me too." "I think there already is," Rebecca admitted, and saw his eyes light up with hope. They reached the ranch on a cold, clear afternoon. It was a sprawling property in the foothills south of Denver, with a large house, several barns, and acres of fenced pasture. Cattle dotted the landscape, shaggy in their winter coats, and Rebecca could see several men working near the barns. Pries rode up to the main house and dismounted, then helped Rebecca down. Before they could reach the porch, the door flew open and a man emerged. He was tall and broad like Pries, with sandy hair and a wide grin. "Prescott Malone, you old dog. I did not expect to see you until spring." "Circumstance changed my plans," Pries said, returning the man's enthusiastic handshake. "Rebecca, this is Jackson Fuller, the owner of this fine establishment. Jack, this is Rebecca Ashford. She is going to be my wife." Rebecca felt her face heat at the casual announcement, but Jack just grinned wider. "Well now, that is news. Congratulations to you both. Come inside, come inside. Maggie will want to meet you." They were ushered into a warm, spacious house that smelled of baking bread and wood smoke. A woman appeared from the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron. She was perhaps 40, with graying hair and kind eyes. "Maggie, we have guests," Jack announced. "This is Pries and his intended, Rebecca." "How wonderful!" Maggie came forward and took Rebecca's hands in hers. "You must be frozen from traveling. Come sit by the fire, and I will get you some coffee and something to eat." The next hour passed in a blur of warmth and welcome. Jack and Maggie were gracious and hospitable, asking questions but not prying, making Rebecca feel at ease. It turned out they had known Pries for several years, since he had worked on the ranch for a season after leaving the army. "Best tracker and horse handler I have ever seen," Jack said, clapping Pries on the shoulder. "I have been trying to convince him to stay on permanent for months, but he is too much of a wanderer." "I may be ready to settle down now," Pries said, glancing at Rebecca, "especially if there is work available." "Always work on a ranch," Jack said. "And if Rebecca needs something to do, Maggie could certainly use help around the house. We have been talking about hiring someone, but it is hard to find people we trust." "I would be happy to help," Rebecca said quickly. "I am a hard worker and I can cook and sew and manage a household." "Then it is settled," Maggie said warmly. "You will both stay here, work here, and we will be delighted to have you." Rebecca felt tears threaten again, overwhelmed by their kindness. After months of struggle and loneliness, to suddenly be welcomed so completely was almost too much to bear. That night, after they had been shown to their separate rooms in the ranch house, Rebecca stood at her window looking out at the moonlit landscape. There was a soft knock on her door, and she turned to see Pries standing in the hallway. "I just wanted to make sure you are comfortable," he said. "And to thank you again for taking this chance with me." "I am comfortable," Rebecca assured him. "Your friends are wonderful. They are good people. You will be safe here, even if you decide you do not want to marry me after all." His expression was serious. "I meant what I said, Rebecca. No pressure. You can take all the time you need." "What if I do not need much time?" The words surprised her as much as they seemed to surprise him. "What if I have already decided?" Pries stepped into the room, his eyes searching hers. "What are you saying?" "I am saying that I have been thinking about it for the past 5 days, and I have realized something. You make me feel safe. You make me feel seen and valued. You make me laugh, and you make me want to be brave again." She took a deep breath. "Thomas was my first love, and I will always carry him with me. But I think you could be my second if you are still willing." "If I am still willing," Pries laughed, a sound full of disbelief and joy. "Rebecca, I have been half in love with you since the moment you dragged me out of that blizzard. I am absolutely willing." He crossed the room and took her in his arms, and Rebecca went willingly, pressing her face against his chest and feeling his heart pound beneath her cheek. His hand came up to cradle the back of her head, gentle and reverent. "I will make you happy," he murmured against her hair. "I swear I will spend every day trying to make you happy." "I believe you," she whispered back. He pulled back just enough to look down at her, and then slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, he lowered his head and kissed her. His lips were soft and warm, the kiss tender and full of promise. Rebecca felt something break open inside her, something that had been locked away since Thomas died, and suddenly she was kissing him back, her hands fisting in his shirt, holding on like he was the only solid thing in the world. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Pries rested his forehead against hers. "We should probably wait until we are married before we do much more of that," he said, his voice rough with restraint. "Probably," Rebecca agreed, reluctantly stepping back. "How long does it take to arrange a wedding? If we ride into Denver tomorrow and find a preacher, we could be married by the end of the week. Then let us do that." They were married 5 days later in a small church in Denver, with Jack and Maggie standing as witnesses. Rebecca wore a new dress that Maggie had helped her pick out, simple but pretty in deep blue wool. Pries wore his best clothes and looked so handsome that Rebecca's breath caught when she saw him waiting at the altar. The ceremony was short and simple, but when Pries slipped a gold band on her finger and promised to love and cherish her for the rest of their lives, Rebecca felt tears slip down her cheeks. They were not tears of sorrow this time, but of hope and joy and gratitude. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Pries kissed her with such tenderness that Rebecca forgot where they were, forgot that anyone else existed. It was just the two of them, making a promise, starting a new life together. They returned to the ranch that evening, and Maggie had arranged for them to have the small foreman's cottage at the edge of the property. It was cozy and private, with a real bed and a good stove and windows that looked out over the mountains. "It is not much," Pries said as he carried Rebecca over the threshold, "but it is ours." "It is perfect," Rebecca said, looking around at their new home. It was small, yes, but it was warm and sturdy and theirs. After the desperate poverty of the past months, it felt like a palace. Pries set her down gently, his hands lingering on her waist. "Are you nervous?" "A little," she admitted. She had been married before, but somehow this felt different, new, important in a way she could not quite articulate. "We can take this slow," Pries said. "Whatever you need." But Rebecca shook her head. She reached up and cupped his face, running her thumbs along his jaw. "I do not want slow. I want to be your wife in every way. I want to start our life together right now." Something heated flared in his eyes, but he remained gentle as he pulled her close and kissed her. This kiss was different from the ones before, deeper and more urgent, and Rebecca felt heat unfurl in her belly. She kissed him back with everything in her, pouring all her hope and gratitude and growing affection into the connection between them. They made their way to the bed, shedding layers of clothing between kisses, learning the shape and feel of each other. Pries was patient and attentive, making sure she was comfortable, making sure she wanted every step they took together. and Rebecca discovered that being with him was nothing like what she had known with Thomas. Not better or worse, just different. Intense and passionate, and full of a tenderness that made her chest ache. Afterward, they lay tangled together under the quilts, the stove radiating warmth, the world quiet and peaceful outside their window. Rebecca rested her head on Pree's chest, listening to his heartbeat, feeling more content than she had in longer than she could remember. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what?" His hand stroked down her back, a soothing rhythm. "For finding me, for saving me, for giving me a reason to keep going." "You saved me first," Pree reminded her. "And you gave yourself a reason to keep going. You are stronger than you think, Rebecca." "Maybe. But I am glad I do not have to be strong alone anymore." "You will never be alone again," Pree promised. "I am here and I am not going anywhere." Rebecca believed him. For the first time in a long time, she believed in the future. She believed in happiness. She believed in love. Life on the ranch settled into a comfortable rhythm. Pree worked with the cattle and horses, proving himself invaluable to Jack with his skills and experience. Rebecca helped Maggie with the household, cooking and cleaning and managing the endless tasks that came with running a ranch. But she also had time to herself. Time to read and sew and take walks in the beautiful landscape around their home. Winter gradually gave way to spring, and with the warmer weather came new life. Calves were born, flowers bloomed, and Rebecca found herself smiling more often than not. She and Pree grew closer every day, learning each other's habits and preferences, building a partnership that was both practical and deeply romantic. Pree had a way of making her feel cherished, even in small moments. He brought her wildflowers when he came home from riding the range. He rubbed her feet when she had been on them all day. He listened when she talked about her dreams for the future, and he shared his own hopes with her. "I want to buy our own place someday," he told her one evening as they sat on the porch of their cottage watching the sunset. "Not right away, but eventually. A small ranch, just big enough for us to manage on our own, maybe expand over time if things go well." "That sounds wonderful," Rebecca said, leaning against his shoulder. "Do you think it is possible?" "I do. Jack pays fair wages, and if we save carefully, we could have enough for a down payment in a few years. There is land available west of here, good grazing country." He kissed the top of her head. "I want to build something with you, Rebecca, something that is ours." "I want that too," she said softly. The idea of having their own place, of building a future together from the ground up, filled her with excitement. As spring turned to summer, Rebecca began to notice changes in her body. She was tired more often, and certain smells made her queasy. At first she thought she was just working too hard, but when she missed her monthly courses, she realized the truth. She was pregnant. The realization filled her with a mix of emotions. Joy, because she wanted children and knew Pree would be a wonderful father. But also fear, because she remembered the stories of women who died in childbirth, because she worried about bringing a child into an uncertain world. She told Pree that night, watching his face carefully for his reaction. For a moment he just stared at her, processing, and then his face broke into the biggest smile she had ever seen. "A baby," he said, his voice full of wonder. "We are going to have a baby." "Yes," Rebecca confirmed, and suddenly she was laughing and crying at the same time. Pree swept her up in his arms, spinning her around, both of them giddy with excitement and joy. "I am going to be a father," Pree said, setting her down gently and placing his hand on her still flat stomach. "We are going to be parents." "Are you happy?" Rebecca asked, needing to hear him say it. "Happy? Rebecca, I am beyond happy. I am thrilled. I am terrified. I am grateful." He cupped her face in his hands. "You have given me so much already, and now this. I do not have words for what I feel right now." "I am scared," she admitted. "What if something goes wrong?" Then we will face it together, Pries said firmly. But nothing is going to go wrong. You are strong and healthy, and we will make sure you have the best care possible. Maggie has helped with dozens of births, and there is a good doctor in Denver. You will be fine, and our baby will be fine. Rebecca wanted to believe him, and over the following months, she found her fear gradually fading. Maggie was indeed knowledgeable and reassuring, and Pries was attentive to the point of being overprotective. He insisted she not work too hard, brought her anything she craved, and talked to her growing belly every night, telling their unborn child stories and making promises about the life they would have together. The other ranch hands teased him mercilessly about being so smitten, but Pries did not care. He was going to be a father, and he was determined to do it right. Rebecca's pregnancy progressed smoothly through the summer and into the fall. By the time the first snow fell in November, she was large and uncomfortable, counting down the days until the baby would arrive. The doctor had estimated early December, and Rebecca found herself both eager and anxious for that time to come. The baby decided to come on a cold December night, almost exactly 1 year after the blizzard that had brought Rebecca and Pries together. Rebecca woke to cramping pains and knew immediately what was happening. She woke Pries, who went from sound asleep to completely alert in seconds. "It is time," she said, trying to stay calm. All right, all right." Pries was pulling on clothes, his movements jerky with nerves. "I will get Maggie." "You stay here. Do not move, do not do anything." "Pries, I am not going to have the baby in the next 5 minutes. Calm down." But he was already out the door, running through the snow to the main house. Rebecca could not help but smile despite the pain. Her strong, capable husband was falling apart at the prospect of childbirth. Maggie arrived quickly, calm and efficient, and sent Pries to heat water and gather supplies. The labor was long and difficult, lasting through the night and into the next day. There were moments when Rebecca was sure she could not go on, when the pain was too much and her strength was failing. But Maggie coached her through it, and every time she opened her eyes, Pries was there, holding her hand, whispering encouragement, refusing to leave her side even when Maggie suggested he might be more comfortable elsewhere. Finally, as the sun was setting on the second day, Rebecca gave one final push and felt the baby slip free. There was a moment of terrifying silence, and then a loud, angry wail filled the cottage. "It is a boy," Maggie announced, lifting the red-faced, squalling infant and placing him on Rebecca's chest. "A healthy, strong boy." Rebecca looked down at her son, overwhelmed with love and exhaustion and relief. He was perfect, with a shock of dark hair and his father's blue eyes. She felt tears stream down her face as she held him, this tiny life she and Pries had created together. Pries was crying too, unashamedly, as he leaned over to kiss Rebecca's forehead and then gently touch his son's head. "He is beautiful. You are amazing. I love you so much." "I love you too," Rebecca whispered, and meant it with every fiber of her being. This man who had come into her life when she was at her lowest, who had shown her kindness and respect and love, who had given her a future when she thought she had none. She loved him completely. They named the baby Peter, after Pries's father. He was a healthy, hungry baby who kept them awake at all hours and filled their cottage with his cries and coos. Rebecca was exhausted but happier than she had ever been, watching Pries hold their son with such gentle care, seeing the love and pride in his eyes. "He is going to have a good life," Pries said one night as he rocked Peter to sleep. "I promise him that. He will never know hunger or cold or fear. He will be safe and loved and free to become whoever he wants to be." "We will make sure of it," Rebecca agreed, leaning against her husband's side. The first year of Peter's life passed in a blur of sleepless nights and joyful days. He grew quickly. a healthy and curious baby who seemed to smile at everything. Rebecca and Pries continued to work and save, their dream of owning their own ranch growing closer to reality. When Peter was 18 months old, Pries came home one day with news. "I found it," he said, his eyes bright with excitement. "The perfect piece of land. It is about 20 miles west of here, good water, good grazing, and the price is fair. We have enough saved for the down payment, and Jack is willing to give us a loan for the rest." "Really?" Rebecca felt her heart soar. "We can really do this. We can really do this." Pries swept her into his arms, Peter squirming and laughing between them. "We are going to have our own place, Rebecca, our own ranch, a place to raise our family and build our future." They bought the land in the spring of 1886, when Peter was almost 2 years old. It was a modest property, 200 acres with a small house that needed work and a barn that needed even more work. But it was theirs, and they loved every inch of it. They named it the Malone Ranch and set about making it home. With Jack's help and advice, they bought a small herd of cattle and a few horses. Pries worked from dawn to dusk, repairing fences and buildings, clearing land, learning the business of running a ranch. Rebecca worked just as hard, making the house livable, planting a garden, caring for Peter, and helping with the animals when needed. It was difficult work, but they were happy. They had each other, they had their son, and they had a future full of possibilities. Over the next few years, the ranch prospered. Slowly but steadily, they expanded their herd, improved their property, and built a reputation for honest dealing and good stock. Other ranchers in the area came to respect Pries's knowledge and skills, and Rebecca became known for her hospitality, always ready with a meal and a kind word for neighbors or travelers. Peter grew into a bright, active boy with his father's blue eyes and his mother's quick smile. When he was 4 years old, Rebecca gave birth to their second child, a daughter they named Ruth. She was smaller and quieter than Peter had been, with auburn hair like Rebecca's and a serious, watchful demeanor. "2 children," Pries said, holding Ruth while Peter climbed onto his lap as well. "We are truly blessed." "We are," Rebecca agreed, watching her family with a full heart. She thought sometimes about the desperate woman she had been that winter 4 years ago, alone and starving and without hope. That woman would not have believed this life was possible. But here she was, surrounded by love and warmth and everything she had ever wanted. When Ruth was 2 and Peter was 6, Rebecca discovered she was pregnant again. This time she was less afraid, more confident in her body's ability to bring a child safely into the world. Their third child, another boy they named Philip, was born in the fall of 1890. He was a large baby with a loud voice and an appetite to match, and he brought even more joy and chaos into their busy household. Life was full and rich and sometimes overwhelming, but Rebecca would not have traded it for anything. She and Pries continued to work side by side, partners in every sense of the word. They had their disagreements, of course, moments of frustration or exhaustion when tempers flared, but they always worked through it, always came back to the love and respect that formed the foundation of their marriage. As the years passed, the Malone Ranch continued to grow and prosper. By 1895, they had nearly doubled their land holdings and had a reputation as one of the best ranches in the region. Peter, now 13, was already working alongside his father, learning everything he needed to know about ranching. Ruth, at 11, was her mother's right hand, helping with the house and the garden and her younger brother. Philip, at 5, was a whirlwind of energy and mischief, keeping everyone on their toes. One evening in late fall, after the children were in bed, Rebecca and Pries sat on the porch of their house watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and purple. It had become their habit over the years, this quiet time together at the end of the day, a chance to reconnect and simply be together. "Do you ever think about that winter we met?" Rebecca asked, leaning against Pree's shoulder. "All the time," Prees admitted. "I think about how close we both came to not surviving. How different things could have been if the storm had been worse, or if I had missed seeing your smoke, or if you had not been brave enough to pull me inside. I think about that too, and I think about how desperate I was, how certain I was that I had no future." She looked up at him, this man who had become her whole world. "You saved me, Prees, not just from the storm, but from giving up on life." "You saved me too," Prees said, kissing her forehead. "I was drifting before I met you, just moving from place to place with no purpose. You gave me a reason to settle down, to build something that mattered. You gave me a family and a home and a reason to wake up every morning grateful to be alive." "I love you," Rebecca said softly. "More than I ever thought possible, more than I knew I could love someone." "I love you too," Prees replied. "Beyond measure, beyond words. You are everything to me, Rebecca. Everything." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars come out one by one, feeling the cool night air and the warmth of each other's presence. Inside, their children slept safe and sound. Around them, their ranch stretched out, the product of years of hard work and love. And ahead of them, the future beckoned, full of possibilities and promise. Rebecca thought about the title she had once heard someone use to describe pioneer women: desperate and determined. She had certainly been desperate that winter, but she had also been determined to survive, to make something of the hand she had been dealt. And that determination had led her to this moment, to this life, to this man who had shown her what it meant to be truly cherished. The winter had made her desperate, but the cowboy had made her cherished beyond measure. And in the end, that made all the difference. In the years that followed, the Malone family continued to thrive. Peter grew into a capable young man and eventually took over much of the day-to-day running of the ranch, allowing Prees to slow down a bit as he entered his 50s. Ruth married a good man from a neighboring ranch, and they settled nearby, giving Rebecca the joy of becoming a grandmother. Philip followed in his father's footsteps, developing a particular talent for horse breeding that added a new dimension to the ranch's income. Rebecca and Prees aged together, their love deepening with each passing year. They remained partners in every sense, working together, supporting each other, finding joy in the simple pleasures of their life together. They had weathered hard times and good times, droughts and harsh winters, economic downturns and personal losses. Through it all, they had each other, and that had been enough. When Prees was 58 and Rebecca 56, they celebrated their 30th wedding anniversary with a gathering of friends and family at the ranch. It was a beautiful summer day, and the house and yard were full of people laughing and eating and sharing stories. Their children and grandchildren ran around playing games while the adults talked and reminisced. As the sun began to set, Prees stood and raised his glass. "I want to make a toast," he announced, and the crowd quieted. 30 years ago, I was caught in a blizzard and nearly died, but I was lucky enough to stumble upon a cabin with smoke rising from its chimney, and inside was the woman who would save my life in more ways than one. Rebecca, you have been my partner, my love, my best friend, and the mother of my children. You have made every day of these 30 years a gift. Thank you for taking a chance on a half-frozen cowboy all those years ago." Rebecca felt tears in her eyes as she stood and raised her own glass. "And thank you for being the answer to a prayer I did not even know I was praying. That winter made me desperate, but you made me cherished beyond measure. I love you, Prescott Malone, more today than even yesterday, and I will love you even more tomorrow." The gathering erupted in cheers and applause as Pries kissed his wife, both of them smiling through their tears. It was a perfect moment, a culmination of 3 decades of love and partnership and shared dreams. As night fell and the party wound down, Rebecca and Pries found themselves alone on their porch once more, watching the stars and holding hands like they had done thousands of times before. "No regrets?" Pries asked softly. "Not a single one," Rebecca replied. "You?" "Only that I did not find you sooner. But then, maybe we found each other at exactly the right time." "I think we did," Rebecca agreed. "Everything that came before led us to that moment, to that cabin, to each other. It was meant to be." They sat in comfortable silence. Two people who had built a life together from nothing but determination and love. The ranch around them was their legacy. But more than that, their children and grandchildren were proof that taking a chance on love, even in desperate circumstances, could lead to something beautiful and lasting. The winter had been harsh, the future uncertain, but they had survived it together. And in doing so, they had created not just a life, but a love story that would be told for generations in the Malone family. A story about courage and kindness, about taking chances and keeping promises, about a woman who refused to give up and a man who showed her she did not have to face the world alone. It was a story about winter making her desperate, but a cowboy making her cherished beyond measure. And it was a story that ended not with uncertainty or sorrow, but with joy and love and the deep satisfaction of a life well lived together. Many more years passed, and Rebecca and Pries grew old together, their bodies slowing but their love remaining constant. They watched their grandchildren grow and marry, welcomed great-grandchildren into the world, and saw the ranch continue to prosper under Peter's capable management. When they were both in their 70s, they moved into a smaller house on the property, leaving the main house to Peter and his family. But they remained active and engaged, still taking their evening walks when the weather permitted, still sitting on their porch watching sunsets, still holding hands and sharing memories. "You remember the day we met?" Rebecca would sometimes ask, even though they had told the story hundreds of times. "Every detail," Pries would always reply. "The way the snow was blowing so hard I could barely see. The relief when I spotted your smoke. The feeling of your hands pulling me inside. The moment I looked into your eyes and thought you were the most beautiful woman I had ever seen, even half-starved and exhausted as you were." "You thought I was beautiful," Rebecca would laugh. "I was a mess. You were an angel saving my life. Of course you were beautiful." They celebrated their 40th anniversary, then their 45th. The ranch had become one of the most successful in the region. Their children and grandchildren were happy and healthy, and they had lived to see the new century arrive, watching in amazement as the world changed around them with automobiles and electricity and all manner of modern innovations. But through all the changes, their love remained a constant. They had built something together that lasted, something that mattered, something that would continue long after they were gone. When Pries passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 79, Rebecca grieved deeply, but without bitterness. They had been married for 51 years, had raised 3 children, welcomed countless grandchildren and great-grandchildren, and built a legacy that would endure for generations. He had given her a life beyond her wildest dreams, had loved her faithfully and completely, had kept every promise he had ever made to her. She held his hand one last time and whispered, "Thank you for everything. Thank you for finding me, for saving me, for loving me. I will carry you in my heart until we meet again." Rebecca lived for another 3 years, surrounded by family, sharing stories about Pries and their life together, making sure the younger generations understood the love story that had started it all. She told them about the desperate winter, the blizzard, the half-frozen cowboy who stumbled to her door and changed everything. "He made me feel cherished beyond measure," she would tell them, her eyes distant with memory. "Every single day, he made me feel valued and loved and safe. That was his gift to me. That was what made all the difference." When Rebecca passed away peacefully at the age of 81, surrounded by her children and grandchildren, her last words were of praise. "I am coming, my love. Wait for me." They buried her next to him on a hill overlooking the ranch, with a view of the mountains in the distance. The headstone read, "Rebecca and Prescott Malone, beloved parents, grandparents, and great-grandparents together forever," and below that, added by their children, a simple inscription. "Winter made her desperate, a cowboy made her cherished beyond measure." The Malone Ranch continued to thrive for many more generations, but the story of Rebecca and Prescott was never forgotten. It was told and retold, passed down through the family, a reminder of where they came from and what really mattered in life. It was a story about love conquering desperation, about kindness in the face of hardship, about two people who found each other when they needed it most and built something beautiful together. It was a story that proved that sometimes the hardest moments in life are actually the doorways to the greatest blessings. That winter had been brutal and unforgiving, pushing Rebecca to the very edge of survival. But it had also brought praise to her door, had created the circumstances that allowed two lonely souls to find each other and create a love that would last a lifetime and beyond. The descendants of Rebecca and Prescott Malone would face their own challenges over the years, their own harsh winters and difficult times. But they would remember the story of their ancestors, remember that desperation can lead to hope, that hardship can be survived with courage and determination, and that love, true and faithful love, can transform everything. Because winter had made Rebecca desperate, but a cowboy had made her cherished beyond measure. And that love, that cherishing, had created a legacy that would never be forgotten, a family that would endure, and a story that proved that even in the darkest moments, there is always hope for a brighter tomorrow. The story ended not with sadness but with celebration, not with loss but with legacy. Rebecca and Prescott had lived full, rich lives together. They had loved deeply, worked hard, raised a family, built a successful ranch, and created countless happy memories. They had faced challenges and overcome them, had weathered storms both literal and figurative, and had emerged stronger and more united each time. Their love story was not a fairy tale. It was real and grounded in the harsh realities of frontier life. But it was also beautiful and inspiring, a testament to what two people can accomplish when they commit to each other fully and completely. They had been partners in every sense of the word, supporting each other, encouraging each other, loving each other through all the ups and downs of life. And so their story became part of the family legacy, told at gatherings and celebrations, written down in journals and letters, passed on to each new generation as a reminder of where they came from and what they were capable of achieving. It became a source of strength and inspiration, a proof that love and determination could overcome any obstacle. The ranch house, though updated and modernized over the years, still stood on the same land where Prescott had first brought Rebecca in 1885. The small foreman's cottage where they had first lived as newlyweds had been preserved as a historical landmark, maintained by the family as a tribute to the couple who started it all. Visitors could see the simple furnishings, imagine the young couple starting their life together, understand the humble beginnings from which the successful ranch had grown. And on the hill where Rebecca and Prescott were buried, Their descendants would sometimes gather, especially on anniversaries or special occasions, to pay their respects and remember the love story that had made it all possible. They would stand by the headstone and read the inscription, and they would remember that even in the darkest, most desperate moments, hope can arrive in unexpected forms. For Rebecca, hope had arrived in the form of a half-frozen cowboy stumbling through a blizzard. For Prescott, it had arrived in the form of a desperate widow who saved his life and then gave him a reason to live it fully. Together, they had created something lasting and beautiful, a love that had not only survived but thrived, growing stronger with each passing year. That was the real legacy of Rebecca and Prescott Malone. Not just the successful ranch or the numerous descendants, but the proof that love, real and true and committed, could transform lives and create something that lasted far beyond a single lifetime. They had been ordinary people facing extraordinary circumstances, and they had chosen love, chosen hope, chosen to build a future together rather than face their challenges alone. And because of those choices, because of that love, their story lived on, inspiring generation after generation to believe in the power of love, the importance of commitment, and the truth that sometimes the best things in life come from the most unexpected and difficult circumstances. Winter had made her desperate. A cowboy had made her cherished beyond measure. And together, they had created a love story for the ages, one that would never be forgotten, one that proved that even in the harsh reality of the Wild West, true love was not only possible but powerful enough to change everything.